question hung in the air, thick and unspoken, a familiar fog that had settled over Eleanor's interactions. "Why don't you enjoy being around folks the way you used to?" It wasn't a direct accusation, more a gentle observation from her granddaughter, Maisie, during a recent and somewhat strained Thanksgiving dinner in Boise, Idaho. Eleanor, a spry 72 years old who once hosted raucous bridge nights and volunteered at the local soup kitchen 3 days a week, now found herself craving the quiet solitude of her sunroom, a mug of Earl Grey warming her hands. The only sounds the rustle of leaves in the crisp autumn air and the occasional chirp of a mountain chickadee outside her window. Maisie's innocent query, however, did stir something within Eleanor, a quiet recognition of a truth she'd been slowly acknowledging herself. The boisterous laughter of her former companions now felt like a cacophony. The well-meaning inquiries about her health and activities felt intrusive. The endless stream of neighborhood gossip seemed utterly trivial. It wasn't that she'd grown to dislike people, far from it, but something fundamental had shifted. A tectonic shift in her inner landscape that prioritized peace over perpetual engagement. This internal recalibration, Eleanor mused, wasn't born of bitterness or a retreat into misanthropy. It felt more like the quiet accumulation of wisdom, the gentle shedding of societal expectations that had once held sway. It was about recognizing the finite nature of her energy and the increasing value she placed on how she spent it. Eleanor's journey toward this quieter existence wasn't marked by a single dramatic event, but rather a series of subtle yet significant experiences that had shaped her perspective over the decades. She remembered the sting of Mildred, her supposed best friend of 30 years, gossiping about her behind her back at the church bake sale. The casual dismissal of her concerns about rising property taxes by her son-in-law, who waved them away with a dismissive, "Oh, Mom, you always worry too much." The well-meaning, but ultimately draining demands of organizing countless charity events, leaving her emotionally depleted. These weren't earth-shattering betrayals, not in the grand cinematic sense. They were the small cuts, the paper-thin slices of disappointment and invalidation that accumulated over time, leaving behind a network of invisible scars. Like the slow erosion of a canyon by the relentless flow of a river, these experiences had subtly reshaped her willingness to readily open herself up to social interactions, without a careful assessment of the potential emotional cost. She recalled hosting those legendary Friday night potlucks in her sprawling Victorian house back in Chicago. The aroma of pot roast and apple pie filling the air, the din of overlapping conversations, the clinking of glasses. It was a vibrant tapestry of connection, but as the years rolled by, the effort of orchestrating these gatherings, the subtle dramas that inevitably unfolded, the feeling of being emotionally responsible for everyone's good time, began to feel less like a joy and more like a chore. Then there was the slow attrition of her social circle. Arthur, her beloved husband of 48 years, passed away after a brief illness, leaving a void that no amount of well-intentioned company could truly fill. Some friends drifted away, their lives taking different trajectories. Others, she realized with a pang of sadness, had primarily been Arthur's friends, their connection to her more tangential. The initial flurry of support eventually subsided, leaving her to navigate her grief with a quiet dignity that preferred solitude to forced cheerfulness. It wasn't that Eleanor disliked her friends or family. She cherished the memories of shared laughter and mutual support. But the energy required to navigate the complexities of social dynamics, the unspoken rules and expectations, the potential for further emotional taxation, simply became less appealing than the profound comfort she found in her own company. It was a quiet armor, forged in the fires of experience, that she now wore not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated need for self-preservation. Consider, too, the relentless chatter that often permeated social gatherings. In her younger years, Eleanor had dutifully engaged in small talk, offering polite smiles and nodding at anecdotes that held little interest for her. She'd navigated the labyrinth of neighborhood gossip, the endless debates about local politics, the rehashing of familiar stories. But with each passing year, her tolerance for such superficial exchanges dwindled. The silence of her sunroom, once perhaps perceived as GMO, now felt like a sanctuary. It was a space where her thoughts could unfurl without interruption, where she could delve into a good book without the nagging feeling of needing to contribute to a conversation. The chirping of the birds, the gentle sway of the wind chimes, these were the sounds that resonated with her now, a soothing symphony of tranquility that nourished her soul in a way that idle chatter never could. She remembered attending a recent 4th of July barbecue at her neighbor's place. The air was thick with the smell of grilling hamburgers and the shrill laughter of children setting off firecrackers. Eleanor found herself perched on a lawn chair, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand, observing the scene with a detached amusement. The conversations swirling around her, about vacation plans, minor household repairs, the latest local sports scores, felt distant and irrelevant. She offered polite responses when directly addressed, but found herself longing for the quiet companionship of her own thoughts. It wasn't that she had become antisocial. She still valued genuine connection, the kind of conversation that delved beneath the surface, that explored ideas and emotions with sincerity. But these moments had become rarer, often overshadowed by the pervasive need to fill every silence with words, regardless of their substance. Eleanor realized that she now prioritized depth over breadth in her interactions. A single, meaningful conversation with a kindred spirit held far more value than hours spent navigating a sea of superficiality. Henry, a retired accountant from her book club, echoed this sentiment during one of their recent meetings. "You know, Eleanor," he'd said, adjusting his glasses, "I used to love a good party, the energy, the mingling. But now I find myself thinking, what's the point? All that noise, all that forced enthusiasm. I'd rather spend the evening with a good biography and a cup of chamomile tea." This wasn't about becoming a recluse. It was about a conscious and deliberate choice to prioritize inner peace and meaningful connection over the obligation of social performance. Eleanor had earned the right to curate her time and her energy, to say no without explanation or apology to engagements that felt draining rather than enriching. This wasn't withdrawal. It was a quiet act of self-respect, a recognition of the profound value of her own tranquility. Then there was the subtle, yet pervasive, feeling that the world had somehow moved on without her, leaving her feeling like an artifact in a rapidly changing museum. The slang her grandchildren used was often baffling. Their perspectives on social issues sometimes felt alien. The relentless pace of modern life, fueled by technology and instant communication, felt overwhelming. Eleanor recalled trying to explain to her grandson, Liam, the intricacies of using a rotary phone. He'd stared at her with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment, his fingers flying across the touchscreen of his smartphone. It wasn't his fault, of course. It was simply a generational divide, a chasm of experience that made genuine understanding feel increasingly difficult to bridge. She'd also noticed a shift in conversational dynamics. When she shared stories from her past, her experiences during the civil rights movement, the challenges of raising a family on a tight budget in the 1970s, her younger relatives would often offer polite nods before turning their attention back to their phones or launching into discussions about the latest viral trends. It wasn't intentional disregard, Eleanor knew, but it still left her feeling invisible, her life experiences somehow relegated to the dusty pages of history. This feeling of being unheard, of having her experiences and perspectives subtly invalidated, was a quiet drain on her emotional reserves. It wasn't a dramatic rejection, but a series of small moments that chipped away at her desire to engage. Why bother sharing her hard-won wisdom if it was met with polite indifference? Why try to explain a different way of life if it was met with a glazed-over stare? Eleanor found solace in the company of her peers, those who shared a similar understanding of the world, who remembered a time before the internet and social media, who appreciated the value of a handwritten letter and a face-to-face conversation. But even within her own generation, she noticed a growing divergence of interests and priorities. It wasn't about bitterness or resentment. It was about the quiet recognition that some conversational bridges had become too difficult to traverse. It was easier, and ultimately more peaceful, to retreat to the familiar landscape of her own thoughts, where she felt fully seen and understood, at least by herself. The fear of becoming a burden also loomed in the quiet corners of Eleanor's mind. As her joints began to ache and her energy levels fluctuated, she became increasingly hesitant to ask for help, even when she genuinely needed it. She didn't want to disrupt her children's busy schedules, didn't want to feel like a responsibility weighing them down. She remembered a recent incident when she'd struggled to reach a jar of pickles on a high shelf. Instead of calling her son, David, who lived just a few miles away, she'd stubbornly climbed onto a wobbly chair, nearly resulting in a fall. It wasn't pride, exactly, but a deep-seated reluctance to impose. This fear wasn't rooted in a lack of love or support from her family. They were always quick to offer assistance when she explicitly asked. But Eleanor carried within her a lifelong, ingrained sense of independence, a reluctance to be seen as dependent. She had spent decades being the helper, the one who organized family gatherings, who offered a listening ear, who could always be counted on. The prospect of reversing that role felt deeply uncomfortable. She started declining invitations to family outings, not because she didn't want to go, but because she didn't want anyone to feel obligated to accommodate her slower pace or her occasional need for rest. She held back her concerns about minor aches and pains, not wanting to add to their worries. This quiet withdrawal wasn't a rejection of connection, but a misguided attempt to preserve it by minimizing her perceived demands. Eleanor was learning, slowly, that true love wasn't conditional on self-sufficiency, but it was a difficult lesson to internalize after a lifetime of being the strong one. Then there was the gentle, almost imperceptible, fading of some of her oldest friendships. There were no dramatic arguments, no tearful goodbyes, just a gradual drifting apart as lives diverged and shared experiences became distant memories. Eleanor thought of Beatrice, her college roommate and confidant. For years, they'd spoken on the phone every Sunday morning, sharing the minutiae of their lives. But as their children grew up, their careers took different paths, and Beatrice moved to Arizona to be closer to her grandchildren. The calls became less frequent, the connection feeling increasingly strained. It wasn't that their affection had vanished, but the common ground they once shared had subtly eroded. She also reflected on her involvement in the local garden club. The camaraderie she once felt, the shared passion for cultivating roses and sharing gardening tips, had waned as new members with different approaches and interests joined. The conversations felt less engaging, the shared purpose less resonant. It wasn't a conscious decision to withdraw, but a gradual realization that she no longer quite fit. These weren't necessarily losses to mourn, Eleanor realized. They were simply the natural ebb and flow of life, the quiet acknowledgement that some connections were tied to specific seasons and purposes. As she continued to evolve, her need for certain types of companionship also changed. It wasn't about outgrowing people, but about recognizing the shifting landscape of her own inner world. And finally, there was the quiet, unexpected joy she discovered in her own solitude. The initial Jimo she felt after Arthur's passing gradually transformed into a profound sense of peace. The constant need to be surrounded by others began to dissipate, replaced by a deep appreciation for the uninterrupted flow of her own thoughts. Eleanor found immense pleasure in her morning walks through the Boise foothills, the crisp air invigorating her senses, the panoramic views offering a sense of perspective. She savored the quiet hours spent reading in her sunroom, losing herself in the intricate plots and compelling characters of her favorite novels. She rediscovered the simple joy of tending her small herb garden, the fragrant leaves releasing their aromas as she gently pruned them. This wasn't a retreat from life, but a deeper engagement with it on her own terms. She no longer felt the need to explain her choices, to justify her quiet evenings, to perform the role of the perpetually social butterfly. Her own company had become enough, a source of profound contentment and self-acceptance. She still enjoyed occasional visits from her family and close friends, but these interactions were now savored for their genuine connection, not out of a sense of obligation. The pressure to fill every moment with activity or conversation had vanished, replaced by a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. Eleanor had come to realize that true connection wasn't about the quantity of her social interactions, but the quality. And sometimes, the most profound connection was the one she had with herself, in the quiet sanctuary of her own being. The wisdom gleaned from Eleanor's experiences, and the experiences of countless others who find their social circles shrinking in later life, offers valuable insights into this often misunderstood transition. It's crucial to recognize that this shift is rarely a sign of negativity, but more often a testament to personal growth and evolving needs. Here are some key takeaways. Acknowledge the weight of past betrayals. Life inevitably brings its share of disappointments and breaches of trust. As we age, these experiences can resonate more deeply, leading to a natural inclination to be more discerning about who we allow into our inner circle. This isn't about holding on to resentment, but about establishing healthy boundaries and protecting our emotional well-being. It's a recognition that not everyone deserves unfettered access to our hearts and vulnerabilities. Embrace the longing for peace. The relentless noise and superficiality of constant social engagement can become increasingly draining as we age. The value of quiet contemplation and meaningful conversation rises. Prioritizing peace over idle chatter isn't antisocial. It's a sign of growing self-awareness and a deeper appreciation for tranquility. Learning to say no to draining social obligations without guilt is a crucial aspect of self-care. Recognize the feeling of being misunderstood. Generational differences, evolving cultural norms, and the rapid pace of societal change can create a sense of disconnect. Feeling unheard or invalidated can lead to a natural withdrawal from situations where this occurs. It's important to remember that your experiences and perspectives still hold value, even if they aren't always readily understood by others. Seeking out connections where you feel truly seen and heard becomes paramount. Understand the fear of being a burden. The worry of becoming a dependent on loved ones can lead to a reluctance to ask for help or to participate in activities that might require accommodation. This fear, often rooted in a desire to maintain independence and avoid imposing, can lead to unnecessary isolation. It's vital to remember that genuine love involves a willingness to support and care for one another, and that your needs are not a burden to those who truly care. Open communication with loved ones about your needs and limitations is essential. Accept the natural fading of old relationships. Some connections are tied to specific phases of life and may naturally drift apart as circumstances and priorities change. This isn't necessarily a cause for sadness, but a normal part of the life cycle. Holding on to relationships that no longer feel fulfilling out of obligation can be more draining than accepting their natural conclusion. Focusing on nurturing the connections that remain meaningful and supportive is key. Celebrate the joy of solitude. Finding contentment in one's own company is a profound and often hard-earned form of self-acceptance. Solitude can provide a space for reflection, rejuvenation, and a deeper connection with one's inner self. It's not a sign of loneliness or withdrawal, but an embrace of inner peace and the freedom to pursue personal interests without external pressures. Learning to cherish and protect this time is a valuable aspect of aging well. In essence, the tendency to step back from certain social engagements in later life is often a sign of growing wisdom, a deeper understanding of oneself, and a conscious prioritization of inner peace and meaningful connection. It's not about becoming reclusive or misanthropic, but about becoming more intentional about how we spend our precious time and energy. It's about honoring our evolving needs and recognizing the profound value of our own company. So, if you found yourself nodding along to Eleanor's story, if any of these reasons have resonated with your own experiences, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear which aspect of this topic struck a chord with you. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss future discussions like this. Your support helps us continue to create content that explores the often unspoken realities of aging and offers insights into navigating this chapter of life with grace and understanding. Finally, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to rate this video on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments section. Your feedback is invaluable in helping us understand what resonates with you and how we can continue to improve our content. Thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to reading your thoughts.